Because if it was all love and light, we would not be going down this road to global fascism and the powers that be wanting to eliminate 2/3 of the world's population. That is not love and light. You cannot eat gold and silver. It is imperative that you start storing food, and I will tell you simply why. If they do crash the dollar, which they are going to do, in order to create a global currency and a global government, you won't be able to buy food.
Who are the new rulers of the world? Their empire today is greater than the British Empire ever was. This is the center of this new empire, all within a square mile in Washington. Down the road from the White House and the US Treasury is the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These two bodies are the agents of the richest countries on earth, especially the United States. The World Bank and the IMF were set up near the end of World War II to rebuild the economies of Europe. Later they began offering loans to poor countries, but only if they privatized their economies and allowed Western corporations free access to their raw materials and markets.
Debt has really been used as an instrument in order for the IMF and the World Bank to get their policies implemented in many developing countries. And we're into a situation now where the poorest countries are in a cycle, a vicious cycle of poverty. They can't get out. And the kind of debt cancellation that's been given still will not allow them to get out of this poverty trap. It's not a question of debt forgiveness, because actually many of the debts were incurred under pressure from the international institutions or were given in collusion with governments which weren't acting in the interests of their people.
Let me ask you, do you know the difference between Tanzania and Goldman Sachs? Tanzania is a country that has a gross national product of $2.2 billion and shares it between 25 million people. Goldman Sachs is an investment firm which has annual profits of $2.2 billion and shares them among 161 partners. That's the world we're living in now.
The World Bank says its aim is to help poor people, promoting what it calls global development. It's an ingenious system, a kind of socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. The rich get richer on running up debt, cheap labor, and paying as little tax as possible, while the poor get poorer as their jobs and public services are cut back in order to pay just the interest on debt owed by their governments to the World Bank. Here in Indonesia, where most people are poor, the handouts to the rich have been extraordinary, to say the least. Internal documents of the World Bank confirm that up to a third of the bank's loans to the dictatorship of General Suharto went into the pockets of his cronies and corrupt officials. That's around $8 billion.
The year 1952 marks the end of the transition from John D. Rockefeller Jr. to his sons. It's from that point on that the brothers generation begins to have the recognition, visibility, and effective control over things that allows them to do the kinds of things they want.
The brothers were anxious to have the money, unlike their father, for whom the money had been associated with such evil, fraught with such peril. There was a kind of a sense that this money could be used for personal ends now to pursue their professional and social objectives.
John D. III continued to run the family philanthropies, but was emerging from his father's shadow through his work in population control and U.S.-Asia relations.
Ironically, however, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems which raise the specter of an alarming and possibly catastrophic disaster to the biosphere we live in. And herein lies the dilemma that we all face. Let me illustrate. Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. In the same period, the world's average life expectancy has increased from 46 years in 1950s to 63 years today. This is a development which, as individuals, we can only applaud. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people and could easily exceed 8 billion by the year 2020. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. The rapid growing exploitation of the world's supply of energy and water is a matter of deep concern, and the toxic byproducts of widespread industrialization have increased atmospheric pollution to dangerous levels. Unless nations will agree to work together to tackle these cross-border challenges posed by population growth, overconsumption of resources, and environmental degradation, the prospects for a decent life on our planet will be threatened. The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic development in a manner that is sensitive to religious and moral considerations. Economic growth is, of course, an inevitable corollary of a growing population and is essential to improved standards of living. But without careful coordination, unrestrained economic growth poses further threats to our environment. This was a major subject of discussion at the conference in Rio de Janeiro on the environment 2 years ago. The focus then was on sustainable growth and global development. It was pointed out at the conference that growth is most efficiently managed by the private sector, but regulation of the process by national governments and international bodies is also needed. And once again, the United Nations should certainly be among the catalysts and coordinators of this process.